Invito a questo punto a prendere la parola a Luigi Martino per introdurre gli ospiti del prossimo panel dal titolo Cyber Diplomacy, Challenges and Opportunities of Diplomatic Initiatives in Cyberspace. Il prossimo panel sarà in inglese. Benvenuto Luigi Martino.
Grazie infinite Raffaele. Thank you very much. Good morning everybody. And let's be quick because we have several people in the panel, but we have to assure the connection of everybody. Let me to check if I have the panelists on board. Yes, we are here. Okay, good morning everybody, and thank you very much to be here. This is the first opportunity to discuss about cyber diplomacy in at ITASEC, which is a more technical oriented, but for the first time we have the opportunity to discuss about not technical topic such as cyber diplomacy and challenges or opportunities of diplomatic initiative in cyberspace. I will leave the floor to the first speaker, which is the ambassador Jürg LAUBER, permanent representative of Switzerland to the United Nations and other organizations in Geneva, but above all, Ambassador LAUBER is the chair of the open-end working group. And then we have the opportunity to discuss about the open-end working group at the United Nations and the last initiatives and how, in particular, my question that I would like to ask to the ambassador, address the question why the open-ended working group is so relevant in the context of cyber diplomacy. Thank you, Ambassador, to be here. The floor is yours, the microphone.
Thank you very much, Luigi, and thanks for organizing this. Welcome, no, not welcome, but good morning to everybody. I see many names. I've met people I met over the last 2 years. It's great to be among this group of friends. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I'm not sure if I'm still the chair. Our mandate is basically finished. There's still some formalities to be dealt with, but I'm at least outgoing. That's for sure. But yeah, let me in a few words try to explain a little bit how I see why, or what I like to see, what I like to think why the open-ended working group was important and its results is relevant. I think it's important in because of the context we found ourselves in, where we came from, and I really hope you think it's important because of the results we were able to produce. And we are all experts here, so I don't want to go too much into the details about the history of the open-ended working group. Maybe just a few thoughts on that. You all know that the UN has been dealing with this issue, the use of ICTs, the impact of the use of ICTs on peace and security for more than 20 years. It started with the General Assembly resolution in 1998. Then it was primarily dealt with by what we call these groups of governmental experts. I think 15 to up to 25 members, very small groups, who did very important work over these years. And they came up eventually with the acquis we have today, an institutional framework with different elements, an affirmation of the applicability of international law, a set of non-binding norms, something on confidence building measures. That's the acquis we have. However, in spite of this important work, we also have to see that there was a bit of a challenge. One, that the group was, as I said, was relatively small. So although the reports of the group, when they succeeded to come up with the report, were ultimately adopted by the General Assembly, not all the member states really were much involved in this work. And second issue, there was an impasse since 2015 when the last report of the HEG had been adopted. So we get to the year 2018 when we had 2 resolutions in the General Assembly of the UN launching 2 processes to deal again with the issue. One, another GGE, limited number, 25 experts, and for the first time, an open-ended working group. Open-ended meaning all member states of the UN had a possibility to participate. That's the group I'm chairing, or I chaired. Our mandate was essentially to look at the acquis. The agenda that we received from the General Assembly was pretty much the elements I mentioned before. Look at the norms, look at the applicability of international law, look at the confidence building measures, look at capacity building, and look at regular institutional dialogue. How do member states want to deal with this in the future? So look at this, discuss it, report on the discussions, and come, if possible, with some recommendations. That's a very similar mandate to what the new groups of governmental experts had as well. Our process was supposed to be roughly a year. We were supposed to have 3 substantive sessions. The first one took place in September 2019, the second one in February 2020. And then from there, things got difficult due to COVID, and we had to switch to virtual meetings. We had to delay the third substantive session. That session took place in March, barely a month ago in New York, and we came up with a report. When I look at the reactions we received to the adoption of the report and the reactions since, I have a feeling that a lot of people were surprised that the group was able to come up to agree by consensus. That was part of the mandate, to agree by consensus on this report. So maybe a few words, if I may, on the result. What did we come up with? The report essentially has 2 parts. It has a core part, which is titled a substantive report. That's the part where we find agreed conclusions and recommendations. That's the consensus part. All the member states participating in the process agreed on what's in there. And then it has a second part, a chair summary plus some annexes, where we reflect the whole discussion, where there are proposals that go beyond what we had consensus on, which provides a wealth of material, new proposals, new ideas that will hopefully fuel future discussions on the issue. And back to your initial questions, what's the relevance? Why it is important? And I like to think it's important from a process point of view, and I may talk a bit more about that in the second round. But it's certainly important also due to the substance that's in the report. And there, probably the most important thing is the reaffirmation of this acquis of 2015. And that may sound like little, just to reaffirm what we've already had. But it's not so little, because first of all, the acquis of 2015 has been questioned and put in doubt in a certain way in the works that followed 2015, the debates, the discussions we had after 2015. Now we are back to consensus. We were able to re-establish consensus on the acquis. Not only that, we were able to do this in a very powerful way, in the sense that we now have 193 member states really subscribing to this, not just adopting a report that has been developed somewhere else, but they were involved over 2 years almost in the development in this report and reaffirmed it, agreed to it by consensus. So a very powerful reaffirmation of this acquis. In addition to the reaffirmation, there are also new elements in the report, even in the consensus part. We have, for instance, a clarification of the relationship between non-binding norms and international law. The report clearly sets out that the norms, the non-binding norms, do not replace the obligations of member states under existing international law, but only complement them. We have new elements in the part that deals with the threats. We have a reflection of developments over the last few years. We have a mention of attacks on medical facilities. We have a mention of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are new agreements on what are the threats out there in terms of cybersecurity. We have a recognition in the report about the devastating humanitarian consequences of cyber attacks. That is not a reaffirmation as such of IHL, although IHL, of course, is part of international law, but we have a clear bridge to getting there in the report. We have a reference in the report to the importance of the general availability and integrity of the internet, so to speak, the public core. There's no definition of the public core, but there's a clear reference in there. We have a strong section on CBMs, confidence building measures, with some specific proposals on how to improve them, how to develop them, how to improve capacity, for instance, through the designation of national points of contacts and the development of an international network of such point of contacts. We have a clear recognition in the report of the cyber gap and the need to address it, including the cyber gender gap. We have a very strong section on capacity building, recognizing, first of all, that capacity building is a two-way street. So countries that are more vulnerable against cyber attacks have something to contribute in terms of sharing their vulnerabilities, have a recognition of the importance of building up your cyber infrastructure in a sense of prevention. And we have the last part on regular institutional dialogue, recognizing the decision that has already been taken to establish a new open-ended working group and the reference to the proposal submitted by a number of states, initially started by France and Egypt, for a program of action in cyberspace. But that's in the consensus part. And then in the other part, I mentioned we have a lot of material, a lot of new proposals, a lot of ideas that I hope very much will contribute to the further discussions. I could mention several. There's ideas about.
Yes, maybe.
You're running out of time. I'll leave it to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador. Maybe we can discuss about these details about the next step in the next part of the panel. But thank you for your impressive input and then your capability to explain why the open-ended working group is so relevant for the international security and stability in cyberspace. Thank you very much. Then I will leave the microphone to the next speaker, Antonio Parenti, which is the head of the European Commission representation in Italy. And then we have the opportunity to discuss with Antonio Parenti about the main actions of the European Union in the context of cyber diplomacy. Yes.
Yeah, Nemanja, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and a special hello to Ambassador Lauber. You asked me to dwell a bit on the what are the main actions of the European Union indeed in the cyber diplomacy, and you got a bit of a taste of it, if you want, indirectly from Mr. Viola's speech this morning. Let me basically look at 5 policy areas where our cybersecurity strategy can give an added value on the international stage. Well, the first one is, of course, related to the regulatory power of the European Union. The EU is, by definition, a big regulator. There is even a number of interesting publication which is actually growing on our regulatory power can be in fact one of our tool in international politics, and indeed that we need to develop and certainly promote and defend our vision of cyberspace at the international level. And to do so, that we need to step up in our leadership in the standardization process, enhance our representation in international European standardization bodies. But certainly, we need to work with other member states, with other of the international, of course, international arena, of course, to develop and affirm international standards in areas like i.e. cloud, quantum computing, quantum communication, And all of this to, of course, be, I would say, fathomed by our values and the respect, of course, among these of human rights, which are extremely important in an international arena. The second part is, of course, this is the second area where I want to tackle, is that, of course, we cannot do this alone. We need to work with third countries and the United Nations to promote our values and vision for cyberspace, and of course sharing best practices and try to cooperate more effectively. We are working with we're certainly working with UN. We are working with our closest neighbors, especially in the Balkan region, which are very often the target of some of the attacks, which we are also been targeting, but we are also increasingly working with regional organizations like the African Union and ASEAN, and also with Latin American countries. And this is, of course, an ideal platform also to promote work on issue of common interest and of course to promote a common future. Of course, work cannot only be diplomatic in a certain way, so it cannot only be based on trying to convince countries to follow our principle. It also need to be a work of defense, and here we have our cyber diplomacy toolbox, and this is our third point of intervention today. And is the toolbox that we use to prevent, discourage, deter, and respond to malicious cyber activities. And this was introduced in May 2019, and since then we had already listed 8 individuals and bodies which have been responsible or involved in cyber attack against the EU and its member state. And this is, of course, an extremely important element to make sure that we complement vision with instruments. And in this idea, the idea of complementing, of course, vision and instruments, we need also to be very much aware that we also need to facilitate all countries, the work of all countries to reap the social, economic, and political benefit of internet and using technology. And of course, this means that, and I referred briefly before when I said that we're talking about a number of other countries on our vision, is also empowering those countries to not only to follow our vision, but also to implement a vision which is similar or close to us. And this means, of course, support partners to increase their cyber resilience and capacity to investigate and prosecute cyber crime and cyber threat. And these, of course, must be done in line also with the overall idea of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, which requires, of course, a bridging the gap in the digital divide that exists at international level. Finally, and this is the last tool, is in what I wanted to present, is the idea of a cyber defense cooperation and capacity development, which aim to provide further impetus for the development of state-of-the-art cyber defense capabilities through a number of different EU policies and instruments. This requires, of course, a strong emphasis on the use of key technologies, like the one we mentioned before, and this is in line with the February 2021 Commission Action Plan on synergies between the civil defense and space industries, which will include action to further support synergies at the level of program, technologies, innovations, and startup. So as you can see, our tools for our policy at the international level is very varied, and it's stemmed from the defense of values, but it goes also through a number of other and additional tools to bring those values into reality and to be able to affect in this way the international scene on cybersecurity, which is of course, a scene which is still very much in development, and where we have a number of extremely powerful and committed actors in working with us, and sometimes also in a competitive manner. Thank you very much. I'll stop here for this first part.
Thank you very much, Director. Thank you, Antonio, for your very useful explanation, because it's quite clear that the European Union maintains a relevant role in cyberspace as a member for the member state, but also as a single actor in the cyber diplomacy. Thank you. Then I will leave the floor now to Chris Painter, which is the president of the Global Forum Cyber Expertise Foundation, former US cyber diplomat. But let me to stress that I would like to thank Chris, because Chris is connected from the United States, and I think that we just night in the United States. That Chris, thank you very much to be here, to be at ITASEC. Please, the microphone is yours, Chris.
Thanks very much, Luigi. And it's great to be here. And I wish I was there in person. I wish I was almost anywhere in person at this point. Look, I think, as you said, when we talk about cyber diplomacy, we talk about a lot of these policy issues, particularly because this has been this conference has a history of being a technical conference. A lot of folks outside of our panelists may be asking, well, why do I care about any of this? And I think one answer to that is, I think diplomacy and these negotiations that Ambassador Lauber talked about, these things that we've heard about in the EU, and the things I'll discuss, all help to shape cyberspace in the future, but also they themselves are a tool to blunt some of the malicious actions that we're seeing. So as I look at this, what we see in cyberspace is a number of things. It's become a new realm of cooperation between countries, of competition between countries, but also a new realm where almost any country that can is building up its military and offensive capabilities, and that makes it a increasingly, I think, fraught environment. At the same time, it obviously offers great promise in terms of the things that we can do in cyberspace, the social and economic good that we can achieve there. I think we also see vast differences in terms of the way different countries look at cyberspace. I think China and Russia, the US, Italy, and the EU look at things much differently in terms of how cyberspace should be governed, what the rules of the road are there. And I think that's important. I think those differences in approach in terms of things like content on the internet and other issues will continue, and will continue to be, an issue as we go forward. So when we talk about diplomacy, and diplomacy in this area is relatively new. I mean, I think I had the honor of starting the then first diplomatic office on this about 10 years ago now. So it's a pretty new field, but it plays a number of important roles. And one is, the fact that we've seen so much malicious conduct over the years. So all the other issues I've talked about, but we've seen lots of malicious conduct, including things like election interference, the big NotPetya worm, the WannaCry worm, continued things like in the US, the SolarWinds, and now Microsoft Exchange Server, which is not limited to the US. So we see a lot of malicious activity, and a lot of that activity is not just criminal activity, but also nation state activity. So diplomacy has a large role in dealing with that. To build off what Ambassador Lauber had talked about, that work in the UN was very important, and that certainly was the work of diplomats to try to set out what the, at least voluntary rules of the road are. The international law applies, that's foundational, that's really important. Just as in the real world it applies in cyberspace. But there are certain rules of the road, because despite all the hype we read about, we haven't really had cyber war, but we had lots of bad cyber conduct. So these rules of the road, these norms that Ambassador Lauber mentioned, which were reaffirmed essentially just a couple of weeks ago, are things like don't attack the critical infrastructure of another country absent wartime. In wartime, there are certain rules that deal with that, but absent wartime, we shouldn't be doing it at all. Don't go after the computer emergency response teams. They're like the ambulances or hospitals on the internet. So getting some agreement among all the countries, including the US, EU, Russia, and China, is important. And that's, I think, been a big benefit of the OEWG that just concluded, and a lot of the work in the UN. But you know, rules are really just words on paper. Voluntary norms are just words on paper if people don't abide by them. If there's no accountability for those folks, whether they be countries or anyone else who violate those norms. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of those violations, as I mentioned, over the years, and there's continuing and even accelerating. And we haven't been very good at holding those transgressors accountable. And I think to reinforce the rules of the road that we've been talking about, we need better accountability, but at the same time, doing that accountability without being escalatory, so we don't make matters worse. And when I think about that, the role of diplomacy in collective action and making sure that we build alliances with countries, like-minded, large tent alliances, to deal with these issues. And we use all the tools we have, whether they be economic tools, diplomatic tools, law enforcement tools, even technical tools in the right circumstances, and try to do it together is really important. There was mentioned the EU Diplomacy Toolkit, which I think is fantastic because that allowed the EU to take collective action among themselves, but also work with the United States and others to do this collective action. We've had a number of cases where we've done joint attribution, where a number of countries have come together and said, X country is responsible. You know, the example is Russia and NotPetya, for instance, is responsible. And you know, the next step is to making sure there are some consequences for those bad actions, and that we've not been very good at. So we need to be much better at imposing, again, non-escalatory consequences on bad actors, on nation-state bad actors, to have a more stable and secure environment in the long term. Now, the other part of that, I think, is de-escalation. So diplomacy can play a role in not only creating alliances for collective action to go after transgressors, but they can also make sure through dialogue that we de-escalate situations. We talked about confidence building measures a little bit. Those are just things like hotlines, for instance, or exchanging doctrine, ways to make sure that as you're interacting with countries you may not agree with, or even countries you do agree with, that things are not getting out of control. And I think those are important. There's been a lot of work done on confidence building. And dialogue is important, even with the countries you disagree with, to make sure you have those channels of communication open. The final thing I want to mention here, and you know, obviously there's a lot more to talk about, but undergirding a lot of these issues is the issue of capacity building, and that's what I'm currently doing as the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation, which is a worldwide capacity building organization that has a number of countries, private sector, and civil society and academic groups. And the point there is a lot of countries just aren't up to speed on this. They're not up to speed in the ability to talk about these policy issues, but they're also not up to speed in terms of their ability to do incident response and other issues and cybercrime. So it's important that we, and Ambassador Lauber mentioned this is a big part of the OEWG, capacity building is foundational to a lot of the other things we're doing in cyberspace, because although Italy and the US are advanced in this, many countries are not. And so that's a key thing going forward. But overall, really diplomacy plays an important role as really, frankly, we're moving into even a more conflicting geopolitical situation on these issues in cyberspace. Unfortunately, it's becoming somewhat of the new battlefield for that, for these tensions. So I think diplomacy and shaping the environment and building this collective action and alliances with friends is very important. So with that, I'll stop, and Luigi, turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for these impressive inputs. And then in particular, I appreciate two main points. The first point is about violations of norms, how we can address this problem if we have non-binding norms. And the second point is about capacity building. Just to mention that the Italian National Laboratory is working with the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs about capacity building programs. And in particular, for instance, our cyber challenge is a part of capacity building program. But thank you very much, Chris, again, to be here. And then I hope that we have the opportunity to host next year in Italy for ITASEC in presence. Thank you very much. Then I will leave the floor now, the microphone, to Nemanja MALISEVIC, which is the director of digital diplomacy for Microsoft, and then is a co-chair for the working group report of Paris Call on Advancing Norm in Cyberspace that I have the honor to be the co-chair of this working group. Neno, the microphone is yours. And then you have the opportunity to talk about the Paris Call and norms in cyberspace.
Thank you very much, Luigi. It is a pleasure to be part of this event and this panel in particular, and it's again great to see so many friends participating today. Now, before going into more detail, let me take a step back and look at the big picture for a moment, because threats, and we've heard that from a bunch of presenters already today, threats emanating from cyberspace cannot be tackled by states on their own, cannot be tackled by civil society on their own, and cannot be tackled by industry on our own. For us here to really make progress in this space, we really must work together. We must leverage each other's experience, expertise, and resources so that the outcome is greater than the sum of its parts. And that is why we so strongly believe in the importance of the multi-stakeholder community in this space, and why we see so much merit in initiatives such as the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. Now, while respectful of the unique responsibility that governments have in matters of national security, the inherently shared nature of cyberspace requires collaboration between and across stakeholder groups to protect the safety and integrity of the online world. And as a result, I think we need more multi-stakeholder diplomacy in this space. Now, to be clear, multi-stakeholder diplomacy is not the same as public-private partnership. Neither does it mean that industry or civil society get to make decisions that should reasonably be made by governments, nor does it mean that all stakeholders need to consult on all issues all the time. Rather, it means that when an issue is too challenging to reasonably be resolved by any one stakeholder group, all relevant stakeholders come together for the greater good. And momentum, I think, for this realization is growing. For example, more governments than ever before have appointed or are in the process of appointing cyber ambassadors, you know, a trail that Chris, of course, blazed. Similarly, the recent OEWG final report contained an unprecedented amount of references to the value of multi-stakeholder inclusion. And again, it's a pleasure here also to share the panel with Ambassador LAUBER. Congratulations also once more from our side on leading this OEWG to a consensus conclusion. And again, we've heard from Chris that how important capacity building efforts are in this space. And from our side, again, also a big shout out to the work of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise in this space. Now, looking ahead, recent proposals for more permanent UN structures to cover these issues, such as that one initiated by France and other countries in their call for a program of action, clearly also point into this direction and include clear recognitions of the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement in this space. Now, looking at the Paris Call, it is now endorsed by more than 75 governments, more than 700 companies, and more than 350 civil society entities, making it the largest multi-stakeholder group ever assembled in support of a cybersecurity-focused agreement. Again, as such, momentum for these initiatives is clearly growing. But how can we make meaningful progress today and tomorrow? And overall, I think we need to work together to really leverage the frameworks that we have collectively built in this space, such as the Paris Call, when we speak about cyber norms. Looking back, for example, at last year, we were able to partner with the Government of Canada and the Alliance for Securing Democracy to work together on a year-long project aimed at countering election interference in implementation of Principle 3 of the Paris Call. But what really made this initiative so exciting for us was that the outcome here was bigger than the sum of its parts. We could not have had the types of expert discussions and could not have distilled the types of recommendations for practitioners in this space on our own. It required a true multi-stakeholder effort to make this happen. And looking ahead, it's a pleasure and a privilege that we have been able to partner with F-Secure, represented here by Nina HYVÄRINEN, who will speak a bit later, and the University of Florence, represented here by Luigi, our moderator, to co-chair a working group on advancing cyber norms. And work in this forum has just begun. We've had our kickoff event the week before last, but I'm really excited to see what we can do together in this space. So in a nutshell, we plan on once again organizing expert workshops looking at one or more Paris Call principles at a time and trying to figure out, having mostly stakeholder conversations to distill the types of norms that might be considered in the spirit of the principles in question. For example, are there specific proposals we could make in the area of supply chain security or in order to protect healthcare entities from cyber attacks? And we plan on compiling good practices, sharing them with the community, and then publishing an overview in time for the next Paris Peace Forum. We plan on complementing these workshops with specific briefing sessions on areas of particular relevance and importance in this norm space, for example, related to critical infrastructure protection, the protection of healthcare entities from cyber attacks, supply chain security, which we will organize in partnership with the German Marshall Fund. And last but certainly not least, we will also have an academic pillar led by our moderator, Luigi, that will help us round out the overall outcomes we plan to deliver at the 2021 Paris Peace Forum in November. So overall, I think it's going to be a really exciting endeavor, and I invite those in the audience who have endorsed the Paris Call and are interested in positively shaping the cyber norms discussion going forward to reach out to us. You'd still be very welcome to join. I'm looking at the time, I'll stop here and I'll hand it over back to you, Luigi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neno. Thank you so much for this overview about Paris Call, and in particular the working group number 4 about advancing norms in cyberspace. And then I leave the floor now to Nina HYVÄRINEN, Head of Corporate Relations at F-Secure Corporation, which is the other co-chair of the working group for Paris Call on advancing norm in cyberspace. Nina, the microphone is yours. Maybe you can put your, you can stress the multi-stakeholderism in the context of cyber diplomacy and the challenges and opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luigi, and it's really a privilege and pleasure to be here. I've been just listening to other speakers with fascination, and I really want to congratulate Ambassador LAUBER for the work that you've done. It is amazing, and it is an important milestone in this work when we talk about cyber diplomacy. I would just say a few words and maybe pick on what Nino was just saying and talking about the Paris Call. And as he mentioned, I also have the pleasure to work with him and Luigi on this important project in the Paris Call Working Group 4 on advancing norms. And maybe I will just start with something that Chris said, which was really something that strikes me is, when you said, Chris, that rules are just words on paper, unless we have the accountability and we have the implementation. And I think this is part of like the work that we need to look in this multi-stakeholder format, like having all governments, private sector, civil society together, how to make those abstract words really tangible and something that will be implemented and actors can be hold accountable for. And I said, like cybersecurity, it's not exclusive right nor the responsibility of just one actor or one group, but it really belongs to all of us, like to governments, to private sector, to civil society. And we really need to look for solutions together to those wicked problems or challenges that we've already talked about today. And as Nino said, all does not mean that you have everybody all the time on all issues, but that you really look at those things where you actually need a wider group of people and expertise, like healthcare and supply chain security are perfect examples where you need to have society at large looking at those issues, because it touches all different layers and players. So it cannot really be solved by just one actor. Or one example is like encryption backdoors debate, not to go any deeper or to touch any of those subject matter points, but just to say that the different players there again have a different approach and different interests, different needs. Law enforcement and intelligence officers look at maybe very differently than human rights defenders or journalists, let alone they take the technical expertise and experts to the table. So those are discussions where you need everybody and their contribution and engagement. Only then you can come up with the best and most feasible, or at least the better informed decisions. Whatever you decide, at least you've had everyone. Because sometimes if you just have one player and one actor deciding on something, it can be very one-sided and sometimes maybe just simply wrong, the decision. But luckily, as also Ninu was saying, and as Ambassador was saying earlier, that it's very encouraging to see that the need and benefit of having multi-stakeholder groups discussing these issues and events has been now widely recognized. And Paris Call, which Nina was talking about, like having that multi-stakeholder group there, having governments, private sector, civil society, academia, gives us a unique opportunity and platform to also discuss these things, but also see what works. And maybe those formats can be brought to other forums as well, and other negotiations. Something that can be done and should be maybe done more on national level in all of our countries, and also on European Union level, to really to have those policy discussions in a multi-stakeholder format, to have different players at the same time. And as Nino said, Paris Call is really, it's open, it's inclusive, and I also can only reiterate the invitation to whoever wants to join as a support and join our work. You are warmly welcome to do that. So let's move from these kind of political declarations to really a collaboration and working together and engaging and hearing each other, not just giving a seat at the table, but really engage different stakeholders in these discussions. I think that is the only way that we can come up with real solutions that are more than just words on the paper, using Chris's well-coined phrase. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nina, and thank you. Then the main point maybe that we can address in maybe the next opportunity is how we can combine the interests of actors, state actors and private actors, but this is another point. Then I will leave the floor to the last but not least panelist, which is Lara Carpini, from the head of the Cybersecurity Department of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we organized this section jointly with Lara, and it's my great honor to leave the microphone to Lara and to give the opportunity to understand the Italian approach on cyber diplomacy and the relevance of a multilateralism in cyberspace. Lara, the microphone is yours. Thank you very much to be here with us.
Thank you, Luigi. Thank you for inviting and inviting me to co-organize also this panel with you. And good to see you all, to the panelists. And I would like to particularly thank you and ITASEC for this segment, because as others have said before me, we think it's very important that the Italian technical and cyber community is better informed about how diplomacy, and in particular cyber diplomacy, might have and has a direct impact also at the national level. And this is true in general in a very interconnected and globalized world. But in our case, it's even more evident, especially for the topics we're discussing. Think about our Constitution, Article 10. The Italian legal system conforms to generally recognized international rules. So that already gives you a very concrete hook on how important it is what happens on the international level, also in terms of normative framework for our country. And at the same time, it is important for us to show how Italian cyber diplomacy is helping to contribute and shape that international debate. The creation of cyberspace, in fact, had obviously having had a huge impact on international relations, and hence the rise of cyber diplomacy as a field of international relations per se. And here I'd like to pay a tribute and salute Chris Painter, not only for his effort to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, but especially, which is already very appreciated, but also for contributing greatly to the emergence of cyber diplomacy as a field. Now, coming to your question about Italian cyber diplomacy, the way we interpret our role is in a way quite orthodox, and I'm afraid I won't give you many surprises. That orthodox and traditional in the very best sense of the word, while not renouncing to be innovative when needed. So if I should decline and articulate better what I mean by that, is that we play as responsible actors contributing to international peace and cooperation through dialogue and diplomacy. And we contribute to the work of the EU and our allies to try to make cyberspace more secure and at the same time respectful of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Going down a little bit in detail, I would say that we work to consolidating that international normative framework, contribute with our EU partners and allies to protecting our citizens and companies from malicious activities in cyberspace, help others to bridge the digital divide, and cooperate with all multi-stakeholders, as it has whose importance has just been recalled by the previous panelist. Of course, at this time, and given and recalling what Director Viola and also Antonio Parenti have just said, the EU has embarked on a large activity concerning cyber and digital issues. And of course, as a member state, we are very focused on that work. And I will mention here in particular, again, the EU cybersecurity strategy, and for our part, working with the EU Cyber Diplomacy Toolbox. We will have an assessment and a process of lessons learned for that. But as others have already said before me, the cyber diplomacy toolbox of the EU has already proved to be quite a concrete instrument of making sure that malicious cyber activities don't go unnoticed, and the perpetrators are called to some sort of consequence. It's last year we collectively adopted for the first time restrictive measures against companies and subjects belonging to some foreign countries for their malicious activities against the EU. So there's an element of deterrence in our posture and activity, but that we do that while always keeping in mind that it's important not to leave aside that more quote-unquote traditional aspect of diplomacy, which is based on trust building and non-confrontational, and as Chris was saying, de-escalatory aspects of activities. More generally, we think that it's important to make sure that collectively we bring out the topics where a notion of shared security prevails, and at the same time we find ways and topics where consensus can be found. The OEWG has been a very happy example, and I thank again Ambassador Lauber for his important and capable steering. Without him, we would never have done it. And in general, I think that anything that we're able to identify that keeps cooperative aspects of digitalization and cyber into focus, also in the field of security, is what we need and we want to do as a responsible actor in cyberspace. Mentioning the OEWG brings me to multilateralism. And here I would like to quote our constitution again, because in Article 11, Italy agrees to the limitations of sovereignty on conditions of equality with other states, to limitations of sovereignty that may be necessary to a world order ensuring peace and justice among the nation. Italy shall promote and encourage international organizations further such ends. So with that, you already have a clear mandate for our action. Multilateralism is in our DNA as Italian diplomats in general. And in terms, as far as we consider cybersecurity, I think there is even more scope in this field for a multilateral action. We have witnessed, as others have said before me, that cyberspace is largely still undefined. It's a field of fierce competition for the technological edge and a domain where the existing legal order could be subverted. So bilateralization of diplomacy only serves those who have already a strong position, whereas multilateralism builds the framework where that common ground can be found and also gives a voice to everybody. So although even the Secretary General of the United Nations the other day said that in an interview that the UN has no teeth, has not been able to avoid large conflicts, that shouldn't induce us to renounce to multilateralism. Actually, should invite us to do more, because I would invite you to see multilateralism from another perspective. Diplomacy, be it bilateral or multilateral, only goes noticed when it fails, because it's very difficult sometimes to see or to measure the cost of inaction, or measure the cost of or the price of the advantage of avoiding a problem. So multilateralism and diplomacy is a process that builds on consensus and therefore sometimes makes makes it less to the news, but it's equally important, and its results are seen over the time. Therefore, we are very engaged nationally on that. We have cooperated and been very active within the OEWG. We will continue to do so with the program of action that together with other 51 countries we have proposed. We will engage in the next OEWG, and but it would be limitative to consider only the UN. We are part of, for instance, of the OSCE, where we are observing in CBM number 14, which is the one about public and private partnerships. To return to a topic that is been mentioned here, the cooperation with the private sector and multi-stakeholder approach in general is very important. We are part of the Paris Goal and look forward to being more active in the future. We have recently started last year a segment on cybersecurity within Med Dialogues, which is the Italian forum for discussion among Med countries and actors. We plan to continue to do that. And of course, we cooperate as a member of NATO, and we are a development partners of ASEAN. I will stop here just mentioning that from November, we will have the presidency of the Council of Europe, where we are already presiding, co-chairing the legal framework group of CAHI, where it is being studied, the feasibility, and possibly coming to a set of recommendations for a possible instrument on artificial intelligence and human rights. So you see, there are many fields where we are active in keeping high the trust and the notion of the importance of multilateralism in any field, but especially in cyber diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for your very impressive speech, and in particular for to mention our constitution about multilateralism. And thank you. Then we finish our time, and then because we need to leave the floor to the next panel, but let me to thank all the panelists that join our cyber diplomacy special track of ITASEC. And then I hope that next year we will have the opportunity to reorganize this panel inside ITASEC. And then let me also thank the PARENTI and the Italian National Laboratory for accepting this proposal, and also Alessandro Armando and Michele Colaiani, which accept to organize a special track on political and social issues on the scientific track about the special track on political and social issues. And thank you very much. And then I will stop here, and then I hope to see you next year at ITASEC in presence. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Hopefully next year in person.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Hopefully next year in person too. Bye-bye.
Ciao, Chief.